Do you want to learn how to harvest maple sap in order to make your very own homemade maple syrup? If so, you're in luck because I have a very special guest here today to show you just how to do that. And that special guest is my dad.
Hey.
That's Jimmy, my dad. Everyone say hello. Your first step, of course, is identifying maple trees. In North America, the trees most commonly used for harvesting maple syrup are sugar maple, red maple, silver maple, and black maple. Here in the Northeast, where I'm from and where my parents live, this is mostly going to be sugar maple and red maple. That's at least what we have around here in Western New York. Sugar maple is the preferred tree for making maple syrup because it has the most sugar content in the sap. So you need less sap to get more syrup. Red maple is still pretty good, but it's got a lower sugar content, so you're gonna need more sap in order to make the syrup. Silver maple, I've heard, is the least desirable kind because it has a low sugar content and the sap tends to evaporate, leaving sugar sand behind, so you don't end up with that nice syrup as easily. While you can identify maples via their bark, it's gonna be most easy to identify them in the months where the leaves are still on the trees. Think for sugar maple, the leaf that's on the Canadian flag. Here's kind of a sad dead maple leaf. So I would definitely do it while the leaves are still on the trees. It's just gonna be a lot easier. My dad and I have wandered around his property while the leaves are still on the trees and given a little spray paint to the trunk of the tree in order to say, like, hey, once the leaves are off the trees, it's winter and these trees all look similar. These are the ones that are maple. You can tap maples that are at least 12 inches in diameter. If they're between 12 to 20 inches in diameter, you can tap the trees just once. If they're between 21 and 27 inches in diameter, you can tap them twice. You can collect the sap when daytime temperatures are above freezing and nighttime temps are freezing. You want to stop tapping once the buds appear on the leaves because at that time, the sap and later the syrup are going to be bitter, so you don't want that. On average, it takes about 40 gallons of sap to get 1 gallon of syrup. Now that we got the basics out of the way, let's let my dad show us the ropes. By the way, there's Shivrock over there. He's waiting for me to take him on a hike. All right, we got ourselves a maple tree. Dad, show us the ropes.
Okay.
So what do we do first?
Well, first thing you want to do is measure your tree. Make sure you're at least 12 inches in diameter.
So that's you're just measuring around the tree, or how do you measure that?
Well, you're going with a diameter. So,
explain what that is for the people that don't know.
and that's if you were just cutting right straight across. I mean, you've got 18 inches right here. Going all right straight across. So
Yep.
You're fine.
We're good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, we got our tree measured. Now what?
All right, the next thing you want to do is, I generally go about 4 feet off the ground, and that's where I put my taps. It's not a set rule. That's just what I like to do. Sometimes you have to go a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but that's what I do.
So to make the taps, you're drilling into the tree?
Yep. And I'm using a 5/16 bit because all my spiles are 5/16. And it works good for me. All right, when you're drilling into the tree, you really don't need to go more than 1.5 inches in, and that's if you see a black piece of tape there, that's why I put that tape on there. There again, I mean, you can go a little bit more, a little bit less, but 1.5 inches is all you really need to go. You don't need to go halfway through the tree or anything. This is a spile. I use stainless steel spiles simply because I can reuse them. I always boil them for 10 minutes before I take them out to use them, and you just use them over and over and over. When you put it into the tree, you're not trying to drive it just as hard as you can. You just want it to go. If you drive it too far, you can split the tree a little bit. And that's what we try not to do.
Off camera, we added a hook to hold the bucket. All right, now what, Dad?
Well, now we just hook the bucket up. All right, you should be catching your sap, which it is. You can hear it. And then I put a lid on top just to keep the rain out. Rain and snow out. And there you have it. You got your first tree tapped. Have fun with that.
Okay, Dad, now that we're collecting our sap, what's our next step once we have that bucket full?
Well, the next step is your choice, really, on how you want to do this. We can just take it over there and put it right in the evaporator pan and boil it, or we can run it through a reverse osmosis filter to increase the sugar content. It actually takes the water out of the sap and then boil it. It cuts your boiling time down by half.
What if you don't have any of this equipment? Can you just put it on the stove and start boiling it, or?
Yes, you can put it on the stove and boil it. You can get some stainless steel warming trays and put them over some blocks. Just set some blocks up outside and put a wood fire underneath them. There's no limit to what you can do.
So what do you have, though? You have some sort of evaporator pan, you said?
Yeah, I've actually got just a plain evaporator pan with 2 electric heating elements in it. They're the same type of heating elements you'd put in a hot water tank. This year's electric prices, I don't know how it's going to work out, but last year it seemed to $10-12 to my monthly bill is all, and with the amount of syrup I put through it, I figured it was well worth it.
Nice. So are you going to show us that stuff? Show us how you do it?
Yes, I will show you as soon as we leave here.
Okay, and one last question before we go over that way. Say you get a whole bucket of sap. How much syrup you think that's going to make?
A whole bucket of sap isn't going to do too much. You need usually 40 to 50 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup.
And so how many trees do you think you would have to tap in order to get 40 gallons of syrup?
That I can't really tell you. When I started tapping, I was only tapping 20 trees. That gave me enough, actually, but I just have gone crazy since then, and I'm making syrup that I'll have for forever.
So in case of a zombie apocalypse, what are we going to live on?
Syrup.
So, Dad, how long you been tapping maple trees?
Oh, about 5 years.
5 years. What made you start doing it?
Well, I had all this land back here and all these trees just sitting here. I thought I wanted to get something out of them, and I love maple syrup.
Oh, me too.
So that's why I started.
Nice. How's the journey been? A learning process?
Oh, it's a major learning process. I'm getting a little bit better at it. There's still a lot of things I know I need to do differently, but it's a lot easier than it used to be.
So this has been a fairly warm winter, yeah, in New York?
Yes, it has.
So has the season been extended because of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this year I started tapping the trees in the middle of January.
Is that normal?
Well, other years I always started in February.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if it's going to extend the season, but the season is definitely earlier this year.
So when's the typical time that you stop tapping?
Right around April 1st. I mean, it can go as far as a couple weeks into April if you have a real cold spring. But you just got to keep watching for those buds on the trees. If they start to come out even, that's when you stop.
And why is that?
Because the sap will turn bitter and it just won't have a good flavor to it.
So, Dad, how many trees have you got tapped right now?
Exactly the amount of trees I don't know, but I've got 150 taps out. So some of the trees have a couple of taps on, some just one. I've even got a couple of places where I've got 4 branches coming out of the same tree, or right out of the base of the tree, so I put 4 taps on them.
Wow. And what are all these lines you have
Well,
going down the hill?
These smaller, closer ones to us are all the lateral lines. What you do is you tap into the tree, and you put your spile in it, and then you hook to the main lateral line here with a drop line coming off the tree.
And where do the lines go? What's the purpose of the lines?
Well, the line so you don't have to use buckets. I mean, I could come up here and collect buckets, but you know, doing that on 150 taps, that's a lot of buckets.
It sounds like a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. So I mean, it's work getting everything set up the first time, but off the lateral lines, it comes into a main line, which is behind you. It's the bigger, lighter blue line. Everything joins into that, and that runs it all the way down to my house.
How long would you say it took you to put all these lines up for those 150 taps?
Oh, I mean, for the 150 taps, I don't know. I probably spent 3-4 days just doing it by myself. I mean, if you had somebody with you, you could do it in a day, probably. I don't know, maybe 2. But
And what size lines are you using?
I'm using 5/16 for the drop lines and the lateral lines, and I'm using 1/2 inch for the main line.
How do you decide on those sizes?
Well, the 5/16 is a pretty standard size. I mean, they do have it smaller, but 5/16 seems to be standard size. It's easy to get. Everybody will carry it that has maple supplies. And as far as the main line going across, that's 1/2 inch. And they say to use that for, I don't know, up to 100 taps. So I've got 100 taps onto that main line, and I've got just using lateral lines for the other 50 going down to the house.
Very good, thanks.
You're welcome. I've got a food safe barrel here that I have all the sap from the hill running into. And then I just open the spout down here, and I take it from here and I take it over to my reverse osmosis filters. One of these days I'll hook a pump to it, but I need the exercise. All right, this float has a brick scale on it, and what that does, it'll tell how much sugar is in the sap. When we're, and this is straight out of the lines coming down off the hill, and when we're done putting some of it through the reverse osmosis machine, we'll show you what the difference is. This has about 1.5, I think, is what I saw on earlier. We'll see. Yeah, that's showing about 1.5% sugar in it. All right, that was my outside storage barrel. I mean, this is my inside storage barrel, and I've got it covered with cheesecloth and stainless steel screening, just to filter anything bigger that might come out, like cellulose from the trees comes down through the lines once in a while, and you get a little dirt here and there. So I try to keep that out as much as I can. All right, this is my reverse osmosis machine, and what it does, it takes water out of the pure sap that comes off the hill. You don't need to use one of these, but it does cut your actual boiling time down, which in my case it saves electric, and in most people's case it probably saves an awful lot of firewood, and it does save your time. Sap comes off the hill at about 1.5%, and it should come out the other end of this at about 4%. And all it really is microfilters. This one here is like a filter you'd have in your house for under your kitchen sink for your tap water. There's other microfilters in each one of these tubes.
Where'd you get this, Dad?
I got this, my son built it for me. He found the instructions online someplace, thought he'd give it a try, and gave it to me for a Christmas present. I do appreciate it. Down here, this yellow line has just nothing but pure water coming out of it. You can go ahead and drink it if you wanted to. This other blue line has the filtered sap in it coming out. We'll pull this out of here and give her a shot and see what it's reading.
And then after you put it through the filter, that's when you boil it?
Yes, after I put it through the filter. You don't have to, you can do it straight out of the tree, or you can do it like this. Like I say, this is just a homemade thing. There are better ones out there, but I like this. For my operation, it's just about right. Yeah, after going through the reverse osmosis machine, it looks like it's up to about 4.5% sugar. So that's quite a difference. Save an awful lot of boiling. All right, let's go boil some sap.
So why do you got to boil the sap in the first place?
Well, what you're doing is taking the water out of it. The sap has a certain percentage of sugar in it. It's normally close to 1%. So 1% of a gallon of sap is sugar. And what you're doing is you're trying to bring that percentage up. So what I'm basically doing here, I'm boiling all the sap I got. I just keep adding it until I've got no more sap to add to it. And once I'm down to my heating elements, I turn this off. And then I take it upstairs in my house and do it over my kitchen stove just to finish it off.
What do you mean by finish it off?
Well, I still have to do a little more boiling. I can't boil it down quite far enough, because if I allow those heating elements to get above the sap line, the liquid line, it'll burn those heating elements out. I can't do that, so I take it down to it, and then I finish it upstairs.
And when you're boiling on the stove, how do you know when it's done?
Usually I boil it till it's at 219 degrees. Once you get up close to that, you'll start seeing it really starting to boil and foam. You don't want to get away from it then, because once it actually hits its 219 degree temperature, if you're not watching it, it'll just boil right up out of the pot. And it's a mess to clean up, believe me.
So what do you do once it gets to 219 degrees?
Well, I shut the fire off. We've already had our bottles boiling, and our lids are hot, so we take it directly from the pot into the jars, seal them up right there while everything's still hot, so they can't get contaminated. And that's basically it.
You got to boil the jars first so
Yes.
that there's no bacteria or anything in there?
Yes. Yes, you do. You have to boil them for about 20 minutes.
And about how long does it take from the time that you put the sap in here to the time that you are finished boiling on the stove?
Well, that's a good question. Depends on how much sap I start out with. What I usually do is get about 80 gallons to start with, and the one day I'll run it through my reverse osmosis filter to take half that water out, and once I put it in here, I'll probably boil it here maybe 6 hours, and then upstairs another 6 over the kitchen stove.
Wow, that's for about 2 gallons of syrup?
Yep, it's all for about 2 gallons of syrup. You gotta love it. So anyways, this is my evaporator pan. I've got probably 7 gallons of sap in there, 7 to 8 gallons. And I have this bucket up here. I'm feeding sap into it all the time to try to keep it as level as I can without causing the boiling to slow down. It seems to work out pretty well for me. I know it's just a homemade thing, but it's what I did, so it's working. I use it.
Why do you use that instead of a regular like pot?
You can use a pot, but you know, I mean, you have to do it up on the stove. I've got 2 electric heating elements in this. That's making it boil.
And why do you have it up on top of these cinder blocks?
Oh, it's up on top of cinder blocks because when I'm done, I put a pot underneath the spout and open the valve and just let it pour into the pan. And then I actually take the pan up and finish it over my stove. All right, after we boil down on the evaporator for a few hours, we finished it up here, the syrup up here. We got the temperature up to 219 degrees. And now all that's left is just to put it in the jars and seal them off. I don't know if you've seen this, but it looks pretty darn good in there. That is maple syrup right there. Alright, the syrup was boiled, and now we're just gonna put it in the jars. Alright, after we fill the jars, what we do is we take a canning jar lid, put the lid on, and then we take a ring, screw it on tight,
And you had boiled those?
we did not boil the lids and the rings. What we did is brought them right up to just before boiling, because we don't want to melt the seals on these things.
You boiled the jars though, yeah?
We did boil the jars, yes.
For how long?
20 minutes.
And how do you know if these lids seal?
After they've sat for a while, the centers will pop up a little bit. It's a lot of fun because sometimes you can hear them popping half an hour later after you're done. All right, well that's basically what we do, and it takes some time, but it gets you outside during the winter months when you normally wouldn't be, and it tastes so good the rest of the year, so it's really worth it. Hope y'all enjoy it. Have fun.
Hope you guys enjoyed meeting my dad. Happy syruping!